Go eat on the street like a beggar. My son Richard shouted furiously when I tried to sit at the restaurant table. I took a deep breath, signaled the waiter, and replied with a calmness that even I did not expect from myself. That is fine, but then you are the one who will have to leave. The words came out of my mouth with a serenity that surprised me. All the diners in the restaurant, the Imperial Crown, turned to stare at us. Richard froze, his face red with shame. His wife Sarah dropped her glass of wine, and the drink spilled onto the immaculate white tablecloth. What my son did not know was who I really am. My name is Mr. Robert Miller, and I am 65 years old. That night everything was about to change forever. But first I need to tell you how I got to that moment, because what happened after my words was something that no one, absolutely no one, expected. It all started 3 hours earlier when Richard called me on the phone. Dad, I want to invite you to dinner at the best restaurant in New York City. I have something to celebrate, and I want you to be there. His voice sounded different, almost mocking, with a tone I did not recognize in my own son. But as always, I wanted to believe that Richard was finally including me in his successful life. I prepared myself with such care for that night. I put on my best suit, a navy blue one that I had bought years ago downtown but rarely used. I combed my hair carefully. I put on a mild cologne and even wore the cufflinks that had belonged to my father. May God rest his soul. I wanted to look presentable for my successful son. Richard had prospered a lot in recent years. He was the regional manager of a large multinational company. He lived in a huge house in the Upper East Side, the most exclusive neighborhood in the city, and his wife Sarah only wore clothes from European designers. But with me, with his own father, Richard was increasingly cold and distant. The family Sundays that used to be sacred in our culture were now just a distant memory. He did not even invite me to Christmas parties anymore. I arrived at the Imperial Crown restaurant just in time at 8 o'clock at night. It was an incredibly elegant place located in Manhattan with embroidered white tablecloths, bohemian crystal glasses, and waiters dressed in impeccable suits. The kind of place where a single dinner costs more than $1,000 per person. A place I knew very, very well, although Richard had no idea about this. When I asked for Mr. Richard Miller's table, the waiter named Anthony looked me up and down. My navy blue suit, despite being my best garment, looked modest compared to the elegant clothes of the other men in the room. Some wore Rolex watches, others wore Italian shoes that cost more than 3 months of an average worker's salary. Of course, sir. Please follow me, Anthony said with a professional smile, although I could notice a glint of recognition in his eyes that he quickly hid. I walked behind him, feeling the curious gazes on me. Some people whispered, probably wondering what a man like me was doing in such an exclusive place. In this city class, differences are very visible, and I clearly did not seem to belong to that world of privilege. Richard was already seated at a central table with Sarah. She was wearing a very expensive red dress that she had surely bought at some boutique on Fifth Avenue, and jewelry that shone under the chandelier lights. I recognized the earrings. They were Cartier and were easily worth $15,000. As I approached, I noticed something that froze my blood. There was no chair for me. The table was perfectly set for 2 people with 2 sets of silverware, 2 glasses, 2 plates. But there was no place for a third. "Hello, son," I said with a forced smile, waiting for him to get up to give me a hug or at least explain where I would sit. In our family, we always greet with a hug, especially between father and son. But Richard looked at me with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Oh, Dad, you arrived." He did not get up. He did not greet me warmly. Sarah did not even look up from her appetizer plate. It was a monumental lack of respect, something that goes against all the values with which I had raised him. "And my chair?" I asked, feeling the discomfort growing in my chest like a ball of fire. "Your chair." Richard began to laugh. But it was not a happy laugh. It was cruel, ruthless, full of poison. "Dad, I did not invite you to dinner. I invited you to see how successful people live so you understand the difference between us and you." I felt as if I had been hit in the stomach with a baseball bat. People at nearby tables began to pay more attention to our conversation. An elegant couple stopped eating to look at us. A group of businessmen interrupted their business talk. "Son, I do not understand," I murmured, trying to keep my dignity intact. My voice trembled, but I struggled to keep it steady. "You do not understand." Richard raised his voice, and several more diners turned to see us. "Dad, look at yourself. Look at this place. Do you really think you belong here? We dine here every week. We spend more in one night than you earn in a whole month working. Sarah finally spoke without looking up from her glass of French wine. Richard, do not be so hard. Your dad is not to blame for being poor or for being the way he is. Those words hurt more than my own son's. The humiliation was so intense that I felt tears forming in my eyes. But there was something they did not know, something I had kept secret for all these years, and that night the secret was about to come to light in the most spectacular way possible. Richard, please, I whispered, trying to control the tremor in my voice. I just wanted to spend time with you. It has been months since we talked as father and son. Do you remember when you used to go to my house on Sundays and we ate burgers together? My son leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms as if enjoying my discomfort. His attitude was one of absolute superiority, like a king looking at a beggar. Talk about what, Dad? About your boring life? About how you spend your days watching soap operas in your apartment in Queens? About how you have to take the subway and the bus because you do not have a car? People at nearby tables were not even pretending not to listen anymore. An elegant couple at the next table exchanged looks of pity towards me. A young waiter stopped nearby, clearly uncomfortable with the situation but not knowing how to intervene. I felt heat rising up my neck, but something inside me told me to stay calm. Son, I work hard. I have always worked hard to get ahead in life, I replied, trying to maintain my dignity. I do not have much money, it is true, but I have my pride. I have my honor as a man. Sarah let out a scornful laugh, and her accent of a rich girl from the Upper East Side became more evident. Pride, Mr. Robert? Excuse me. But what do you have to be proud of? You live in a 2-room apartment, take public transport, and buy your clothes at the flea market. I do not want to offend you, but that is the reality. Each word was like a stab, but what hurt the most was seeing the satisfied smile on my son's face. How had he become this cruel person? Where was the sweet boy I had raised with so much love and sacrifice? The same boy I taught to ride a bike in Central Park, whom I helped with his homework every night, whom I took to church every Sunday. Dad, continued Richard, raising his voice so more people could hear, the truth is that I am ashamed to introduce you as my father. Look at Sarah. Look how she dresses, how she speaks, how she behaves. That is the woman who corresponds to someone like me, to someone of my social level. Sarah smiled arrogantly and adjusted her dyed blonde hair. It was obvious she had spent a fortune on beauty treatments. Her red dress must have cost more than $10,000, and her shoes were from an Italian brand I knew very, very well. Too well, in fact. Sarah comes from an important family, Richard continued proudly. Her dad owns 3 luxury car dealerships in Texas. She studied at an Ivy League university, speaks 3 languages, and understands business. And you? What can you teach me? How to survive on $700 a week? The tears threatened to spill from my eyes, but I held them back. A man of my generation does not cry in public. We were taught to be strong, to endure, but this was too much. There was something Richard did not know, something Sarah did not know, something no one in my family knew, and that night was about to change their lives forever. The waiter, Anthony, approached our table discreetly. I had known him for years, although he could not say anything at that moment. He looked at me with concern in his eyes, and I could see it hurt him to witness this humiliation. "Do you wish to order anything else?" he asked politely, addressing Richard. "No, thanks," Richard replied abruptly. "My dad is not going to have dinner with us. In fact, I think it is time for him to leave. This place is for people who can afford it, not for—" He stopped, but we all knew what he was going to say. "But son," I murmured, "I thought you said you wanted to celebrate something with me. I thought we were finally going to spend time together like before, like when you were a child and you told me all your dreams." Richard laughed again, and that sound pierced my heart like a knife. "Celebrate with you, Dad? What I am celebrating is my promotion, my new position as regional director, my successful life. Do you think I want to celebrate that with someone who reminds me where I come from? Sarah and I belong to a different social level than yours. We are no longer working class. Now we are part of the elite." "Richard is right," Sarah added, taking a sip of her wine that cost $500 a bottle. "We frequent these places because we can afford them. We have money, education, and social class to be here. It is nothing personal against you, Mr. Robert, but there are differences that cannot be ignored. You come from the bottom, we are already at the top." I looked around the restaurant. It was truly beautiful. The crystal chandeliers shone softly, creating a magical atmosphere. The paintings on the walls were original works of art by renowned artists. I could recognize an authentic masterpiece. The live piano music created a perfect ambiance. Every detail had been carefully selected to create the most elegant experience possible. "This restaurant is really beautiful," I commented in a low voice, admiring the architectural details, the moldings on the ceiling, the Italian marble floor. "Of course it is beautiful," Richard replied arrogantly. "It is the most expensive in all of New York City. The waiting list for a table here is 3 months. But when you have money and connections like us, doors open." "I have pull here." Sarah nodded enthusiastically. "We know the manager, the chef, and even the owner. Well, Richard knows the owner personally. That is why they always give us the best table, the one in the center where everyone can see us. It is important that the right people see us in the right places." A small smile appeared on my lips. If they knew the truth about who really knew the owner of that restaurant, if they knew who that owner really was. "Dad, why are you smiling like that?" Richard looked at me suspiciously. "Do you find it funny that I am explaining to you how the real world works? Do you find your own humiliation amusing?" "No, son," I replied calmly, my smile growing a little more. "I was just thinking that you are right about one thing. There are differences that cannot be ignored, but maybe they are not the differences you think." Richard frowned in confusion. "What are you talking about?" I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of my 65 years, but also feeling an inner strength I had not felt in a long time. "You are right that there are differences between us, son. But the biggest difference is not money. It is respect. It is humanity. It is remembering where you come from and who helped you get where you are. Look, old man." Richard raised his voice even more, and now practically the whole restaurant was looking at us. "I am not going to keep listening to your poor man's sermons. I am tired of your cheap morality. If you have no money, if you achieved nothing in life, that is your problem, not mine. I did achieve success. I did go far." The tears now flowed freely down my face, and I no longer cared to hide them. "Do you know what is the saddest thing about all this, Richard?" My voice broke. "That I sacrificed everything for you. I worked double shifts for years to pay for your college. I sold the only car we had so you would have money when you went to study abroad. Your mother, may she rest in peace, left this world without having known a decent vacation because all our money went to your education. That was your decision," Richard replied coldly. "No one forced you to make those sacrifices. And frankly, Dad, that was the minimum you could do as a father. It was your obligation to give me a good education," Sarah added, looking at her perfectly manicured nails. "Besides, Mr. Robert, you should be proud that your son has reached so high. Many parents of your social class would be happy for their sons to rise in life. Why do you have to make this so difficult? Why can you not simply accept your place, my place?" I repeated, feeling a mixture of sadness and something else, something that was growing inside me. It was not anger exactly, it was determination. "You are right, Sarah. Everyone must know and accept their place, and I think the time has come for everyone at this table to know exactly what our place is." I turned to Anthony, who had been observing the whole scene from a respectful distance. "Anthony, could you bring me a chair, please? I think after all I'm going to stay for dinner." Richard let out a cruel laugh. "Seriously, Dad, are you going to stay here and be embarrassed? Do you not realize you do not fit in? Look at your old suit, your worn shoes. This place has a dress code and you barely meet it." "Oh, I think I fit in perfectly here," I replied with a calmness that surprised even myself. "In fact, I probably fit in better than you imagine." Anthony brought a chair and placed it at the table. I could see a small smile on his lips, as if he knew what was about to happen. I sat down elegantly, unfolded the napkin, and placed it on my lap. "Now, son, before you continue insulting me, let me ask you a question. When you said you know the owner of this restaurant, do you mean knowing him personally, or have you simply heard of him?" Richard hesitated for a moment. "Well, I have spoken to him a couple of times. He is a very important man, very private, but we know each other. He respects me because he knows I am an important customer who spends a lot of money here." "Interesting," I said, taking a sip of the water Anthony had served in my glass. "And what is the name of this important and private owner?" "His name is, well, everyone calls him Mr. Robert," Richard replied, and I could see a flash of doubt in his eyes. "Why do you ask?" The whole restaurant seemed to go silent. Even the piano music stopped for a moment. I looked my son directly in the eyes and said the words that would change everything. "How curious that you ask, son. Why is that, Mr. Robert?" "It is me." The silence that followed my words was deafening. Richard looked at me with his mouth open, his face going from the red of shame to the pale white of shock. Sarah dropped her fork, which clattered against the fine china plate with a sound that seemed amplified in the absolute silence of the restaurant. "What? What did you say?" Richard could barely articulate the words. His voice sounded like that of a small child, vulnerable and scared. "He was no longer the arrogant executive of a few minutes ago," I said. I repeated calmly, enjoying every second of this moment I had waited for so long, that I am the owner of the imperial crown. This restaurant, with its embroidered tablecloths, its bohemian crystal glasses, its masterpieces on the walls, all this is mine. It has been for the last 15 years. Richard shook his head violently as if he could erase my words with the movement. "No, no, no, that is impossible. You live in an apartment in Queens. You take the subway. You buy your clothes at the market. I have given you money because I thought you needed it." A sad smile appeared on my face. "Yes, son, I accepted your money. Do you know what I did with it? I gave it to Anthony here present to help pay for his eldest daughter's college. Every dollar you gave me with pity I used to help someone who really needed it." Anthony, who had remained near our table, nodded with tears in his eyes. "It is true, young Richard. Mr. Robert is the most generous man I have known. When my wife needed emergency surgery 2 years ago, he paid for everything without me asking for anything. When my youngest son wanted to study music but we had no money for the conservatory, Mr. Robert got him a full scholarship." Sarah finally found her voice, although it sounded shaky. But this makes no sense. If you have so much money, why do you live like that? Why do you wear old clothes? Why do you take public transport?" I leaned back in my chair. I took the menu Anthony offered me and ordered without looking at it. "Anthony, please bring me the beef fillet with mushroom sauce, the one we prepare with mushrooms imported from Italy, and a bottle of the Chateau Margaux 1995, the one from the special cellar." Anthony smiled broadly. "Right away, Mr. Robert, the one from your personal reserve." As Anthony walked away, I looked at my son and daughter-in-law. "Why do I live like this?" "Because after your mother died, Richard, I realized something fundamental. She and I worked all our lives building this business. We started with a small food stand in the Bronx. Do you remember that, son? Of course not. You were very small." Richard remained silent, his arrogance completely evaporated. "Your mother and I worked from 5 in the morning until 11 at night. We saved every dollar. In 15 years we went from that food stand to owning 3 restaurants, then 5, then 10. And finally, 15 years ago, we bought this place. The imperial crown was a dream your mother and I shared." Tears began to roll down my cheeks. But this time they were not tears of humiliation. They were tears of memory, of love for the woman who was no longer here. "When your mother died 7 years ago, I was left with all this empire. 12 restaurants in total, 3 in New York, 2 in Chicago, 2 in Los Angeles, and the rest distributed in other cities. Do you know how much all this is worth, son? More than $50 million. Sarah choked on her wine. 50 million. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Yes," I continued. "But after your mother died, all that money seemed empty to me. I realized I had spent so much time building wealth that I forgot to build relationships. So I made a decision. I would live simply, modestly, to remember where I came from, to not lose touch with reality." I leaned forward, looking directly into my son's eyes. "I wanted to see, Richard, if you would love me for who I am, not for what I have. I wanted to know if the son I raised with so much love and sacrifice would keep the values your mother and I taught him, the values of humility, respect, and gratitude." "Dad, Richard tried to speak, but I stopped him with a gesture of my hand. "Let me finish. During the last 5 years since you got your job at that multinational company, I have seen you change. I have seen you become colder, more distant. You stopped visiting me. You stopped calling me. And when you finally called me, it was only to brag about your new house, your new car, your trips to Europe." Anthony returned with my food and wine. He served it with the same professionalism as always, but I could see in his eyes that he was enjoying this moment as much as I was. When the other diners saw the wine I had been served, several murmurs of surprise ran through the restaurant. That wine cost $2,500 a bottle. I took a sip, savoring the rich taste I had learned to appreciate over the years. "This wine is from my personal collection. I have more than 500 bottles in this restaurant's cellar. Some are worth more than $5,000 each. But do you know what, Richard? I would rather drink a glass of lemonade prepared by your mother at our old food stand than all the fine wine in the world. Sarah had started crying silently. Her perfect makeup began to run, and for the first time since I met her, she looked human, vulnerable. Mr. Robert, I did not know. Richard never told me you had had a food stand. He told me he came from a middle-class family. Ah, I said ironically. So Richard lied to you about his origins? He was so ashamed of where he came from that he had to invent a different story. Richard buried his face in his hands. Dad, forgive me, I do not know what to say. Do not say anything yet, I replied firmly, because I have not finished yet. You see, son, during these last 5 years I have been watching you. I have been at your company parties mixing with the waiters, seeing how you treated the service staff. I have gone to events where you were staying in the shadows, listening to how you talked about me with your colleagues. Richard's eyes opened with horror. What? You have been? Yes, I interrupted. I heard when you told your boss your father had died. I heard when you told your friends you came from a rich family in Texas. I heard when you mocked the workers in your office because they could not afford vacations in Europe. I stood up, feeling all the force of my indignation. And tonight, when you called me to invite me to dinner, I knew exactly what you were going to do. Anthony called me to warn me that you had made a reservation and that you had specifically told him to only set 2 places, that you wanted to humiliate me in front of your wife and in front of this whole restaurant. The restaurant manager, Oscar, approached our table. He was a man of about 50, elegant and professional. Does Mr. Robert need anything? Yes, Oscar, I replied. Please bring the folders I prepared. The ones in my office. Oscar nodded and disappeared towards the back of the restaurant. While we waited, I looked at the other diners. Many of them were regular customers I knew well. Some were successful businessmen. Others were politicians. Some were famous artists. They all dined at my restaurant regularly, and many knew me personally. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, raising my voice so everyone could hear, I am sorry to interrupt your evening, but I need you to witness something important. The whole restaurant went silent, all eyes fixed on our table. My name is Robert Miller, and I am the owner of this restaurant and 11 others. Many of you know me. We have shared conversations. I have heard your stories. I have celebrated your successes, and I have comforted your failures. For me, this restaurant has never been just a business. It is a community. I pointed to Richard. This is my son, Richard. Tonight he invited me here with the purpose of humiliating me, of making me feel inferior, of showing me that he had ascended the social ladder while I had been left behind. What he did not know was that everything he has, everything he is, he built on the foundations his mother and I laid with our work and sacrifice. Oscar returned with several thick folders. He placed them on the table in front of Richard. What is this? My son asked with a trembling voice. Open it, I ordered. Richard opened the first folder with trembling hands. Inside were legal documents, property deeds, financial statements. His eyes moved rapidly over the pages, and with every second that passed, his face became paler. This is your whole empire, he murmured. Yes, I confirmed. 12 restaurants valued at $50 million. But there is more. Open the second folder. The second folder contained a will. The will I had prepared 3 years ago when I thought Richard was still the son I had raised. That will, I explained, left everything to you, the whole empire your mother and I built. But that version is dated 3 years ago. Now open the third folder. Richard opened the third folder, and what he saw there made tears finally flow from his eyes. It was a new will dated 2 weeks ago. This new will, I said with a firm voice, leaves 80% of my fortune to a charitable foundation I established in your mother's name. A foundation that will help low-income families start their own businesses just as we did. And the other 20%, Sarah whispered. The other 20% will be divided among my loyal employees. Anthony will receive enough money to ensure his 3 children can finish college without worries. Oscar will receive enough to finally open the small restaurant he has dreamed of for years. And so with each of the 200 employees who work in my restaurants. And me? Richard asked, his voice broken. What do you leave me? I sat down again, tired suddenly. I leave you the most valuable lesson I can give you, son. I leave you the opportunity to learn what success really means, what humility means, what respect means. But, Dad, I have not finished. I interrupted him. However, there is something you should know. This new will is not activated yet. It is signed, but it has not been notarized. I have 30 days to decide whether to activate it or not. A flash of hope appeared in Richard's eyes. Does that mean that? It means, I said slowly, that you have exactly 6 months to prove to me that the son your mother and I raised still exists somewhere inside you. 6 months to prove you can change. What do I have to do? Richard leaned forward, desperate. Tomorrow you will resign from your executive job. You will start working here at the Imperial Crown as a waiter. You will earn the minimum wage that all new waiters earn, $2,000 a month. Sarah screamed. What? That is ridiculous. Richard earns $20,000 a month at his current job. I know, I replied calmly. And you, Sarah, will also have to work. Anthony told me that the St. Mary nursing home needs volunteers. You will spend 20 hours a week there caring for the elderly, helping them with their daily needs. I am not going to clean old people, Sarah protested, horrified. Then, I said simply, you will not see a single dollar of my fortune. It is your decision. Richard looked at Sarah, then looked at me. I could see the internal battle reflected on his face, his pride, his arrogance, his sense of superiority, all fighting against the reality of what was at stake. Also, I continued, you will move out of your house in the Upper East Side. I have arranged an apartment for you in Queens, not far from where I live. It is a modest place with 2 bedrooms similar to the one you thought was my only home. This is crazy. Sarah stood up, her face red with fury. You cannot force us to live like poor people. I am not forcing you to do anything, I replied calmly. It is your choice. You can continue with your current life, with your job, your house, your lifestyle. But then when I die, my fortune will go completely to charity. Or you can accept my proposal, spend 6 months living differently, and maybe, just maybe, recover not only the inheritance but something much more valuable, your humanity. Richard stood up slowly. Tears ran freely down his face now. Dad, do you really think I am so bad, so lost? My heart broke seeing my son like this, but I knew I had to be strong. I do not think you are bad, son. I think you are lost. I think in your search for material success, you forgot what really matters. And yes, I think if I do not do something drastic now, I will lose you forever. I accept, Richard said suddenly. Sarah looked at him with disbelief. What? Richard, you cannot be serious. I accept, Richard repeated louder this time. I will do whatever you ask, Dad. I will work as a waiter. I will live in a modest apartment. I will do whatever is necessary to prove to you I can change. I stood up and walked towards my son. We were face to face now, and I could see in his eyes something I had not seen in years. Genuine humility. Then tomorrow at 8 in the morning, you will report here. Oscar will be your supervisor. You will learn every aspect of the business from the bottom. You will clean tables, wash dishes, serve customers, and you will do it with a smile and with respect. I will do it, Richard promised. I turned to Sarah. And you? Are you willing to be part of this? Sarah looked at me with eyes full of tears and rage, but finally nodded. I will do it, but only because I love Richard. That is enough for now, I said. Love is a good start. I took out my wallet and put several bills on the table. This will cover your dinner, and Richard, tomorrow when you arrive, you will not arrive in your BMW. You will take the subway like I do every day. You will learn what it means to be like 90% of the population of this city. As I prepared to leave, Anthony approached and whispered to me, Mr. Robert, are you sure about this? It is very hard. It has to be hard, Anthony, I replied in a low voice. It is the only way to save my son. I began to walk towards the exit, but stopped and turned one last time. Oh, and one more thing. During these 6 months, you cannot tell anyone who I really am. Not your friends, not your previous colleagues, not the family. You will have to live with the shame of having a poor father just as you have done until now. Only this time, it will be a conscious lie. Richard nodded, understanding the irony. I understand, Dad. As I walked out of the restaurant into the cold New York night, I felt an incredible weight on my shoulders. I had taken the first step in what would be the biggest challenge of my life, saving my son from himself. The next 6 months would determine if Richard really was capable of changing, or if I had lost him forever. But at least now there was hope, and sometimes hope is all a father needs. The alarm clock rang at 6 in the morning. Richard reached out his hand instinctively to turn it off, but instead of touching his Italian mahogany nightstand, his hand hit a cheap plastic table. Reality hit him like a bucket of cold water. He was no longer in his mansion in the Upper East Side. He was in a two-bedroom apartment in Queens, with thin walls through which he could hear the neighbors arguing. Sarah was awake beside him, staring at the ceiling with red and puffy eyes. It was obvious she had spent the night crying. "I cannot believe this is happening," she murmured without looking at him. "Yesterday we had everything. Today we are poor." "We are not poor," Richard replied, although his voice lacked conviction. "We are just living differently, temporarily." Temporarily. Sarah finally looked at him, and her eyes were filled with resentment. "Richard, it is 6 months. 6 months of my life living in this horrible place, working with old people who probably smell bad while you wash dishes. And what if in the end your father decides to disinherit you anyway? What if all this is for nothing?" Richard had no answer. That same question had kept him awake most of the night. He got out of bed, a standard double bed that was microscopic compared to his previous king size, and walked to the small bathroom. The mirror was stained. The shower barely had water pressure, and the towels were rough and old. While he showered with water that alternated between freezing and lukewarm, Richard thought about how he had reached this point. When exactly had he begun to despise his father? When had he started to be ashamed of his humble origins? He could not remember a specific moment. It had been gradual, like a slow poison infiltrating his soul. He put on the uniform Oscar had given him the night before. Cheap black pants, a white polyester shirt, and uncomfortable black shoes. He looked in the mirror and barely recognized himself. The executive in the Armani suit had disappeared. In his place was a common waiter. "How do I look?" he asked, coming out of the bathroom. Sarah looked him up and down, and for a moment he saw something in her eyes. Was it contempt? Disappointment? "You look different," was all she said. It was not exactly a compliment. At 7:30, Richard left the apartment and walked to the subway station. It had been years since he took public transport. He forgot how crowded it was during rush hour. Bodies pressed against bodies, the smell of sweat mixed with cheap perfume, street vendors shouting, musicians playing out of tune, songs hoping for a few coins. While the car shook and swayed, Richard held onto the metal pole and looked around. An older woman carried heavy shopping bags. A high school student studied for an exam. His book balanced precariously in one hand. A man in work overalls slept standing up, clearly exhausted from his night shift. This was the reality of millions of people, a reality he had conveniently forgotten. He arrived at the Imperial Crown at 7:55 in the morning. Oscar was already there along with Anthony and 5 other waiters. "Good morning, Richard," Oscar said formally. "Welcome to your first day. Here there are no executive titles, no private offices, no assistants. Here there is hard work and customers to serve." "I understand," Richard replied, trying to sound humble. Oscar studied him for a moment. "Really? We will see. Anthony will be your trainer for the first 2 weeks. You will do exactly what he tells you, without complaints, without excuses. Understood?" "Yes, sir." The words felt strange in his mouth. It had been years since Richard called anyone sir. He was the one who received that treatment. Anthony approached. His expression was neutral but professional. "Follow me, Richard. I will show you how everything works." The next few hours were a brutal revelation. Richard learned to fold napkins into elaborate shapes, something that took practice and patience. He learned to carry multiple plates at once without spilling anything, a skill that required balance and concentration. He learned that memorizing complex orders without writing them down was an art form. "Good waiters," explained Anthony, "can remember orders from 5 different tables without getting confused. Great waiters can remember 10. But the hardest lesson came when the restaurant opened for lunch. Richard was assigned to a section of 4 tables. His first table was a middle-aged couple who looked like tourists. "Good afternoon," said Richard, trying to smile. "Welcome to the Imperial Crown. My name is Richard, and I will be your waiter this afternoon." The man barely looked at him. "Bring us water, with ice. And do not take long." There was no please. There was no basic courtesy, just a dry order. Richard felt a pang of irritation, but swallowed his pride. "Right away, sir." While he filled the glasses with water in the service area, Anthony approached. "How does it feel?" he asked with a small smile. "Feel? Humiliating," admitted Richard. Anthony nodded. "That is exactly how you made your father feel last night." Remember? He asked you for a chair, and you treated him as if he were less than human. The words hit Richard like a slap. He was right. Absolutely right. He took the water to the table and while serving spilled a little on the tablecloth. "Careful, idiot," shouted the man. "Are you new or what?" "Yes, sir. I am very sorry. I will bring a clean tablecloth immediately." No, it is fine. But be more careful now. Take our order." During the next 6 hours, Richard experienced what it really meant to work in customer service. He had to endure complaints about food arriving too hot or too cold. He had to smile when a customer called him to complain that his steak was exactly as ordered, but I do not like it anyway, so bring me another one. He had to clean up when a small child knocked his orange juice all over the table and floor. He had to run from one side to another, his feet hurting in those cheap shoes, sweating through his polyester shirt, and worst of all, he had to do it all with a smile. At 3 in the afternoon, during a brief break, Richard sat in the employee area completely exhausted. Anthony sat next to him and offered him a cheeseburger he had brought from home. "Eat, you need energy. The dinner shift is even busier." Richard took the burger, and at that moment he realized something. It was the best burger he had eaten in years. Not because it was gourmet or prepared by a famous chef. It was delicious because he needed it, because he had earned it with his work. "Anthony," said Richard after swallowing, "I want to ask you something. How do you do it? How do you stand people treating you like that day after day?" Anthony shrugged. "At first it was difficult, but then I learned something important. The way people treat me does not define my value as a person. I know who I am. I am a father who works hard to support his family. I am an honest man who does his job with pride. What rude customers think of me does not change that. But does it not make you angry? Do you not want to yell back?" "Of course," admitted Anthony. "But then I think of my children. I think of how Mr. Robert helped me when I needed it most. I think that this job allows me to give my family a decent life, and that makes it all worth it." Meanwhile, in another place in the city, Sarah was having her own revelation. The St. Mary nursing home was not what she expected. She had imagined a depressing and dirty place full of senile old people who did not even know their own names. Instead, she found a clean and cozy place with well-kept gardens and bright rooms decorated with family photographs. The director, a woman named Teresa, received her warmly. "Welcome, Sarah. Mr. Robert told us about you. He told us you would be helping here for the next 6 months." "Yes," Sarah replied coldly. "I am here because I have no choice." Teresa looked at her with understanding. "Many of our volunteers start like that, but most end up staying because they want to, not because they have to. Come, I will introduce you to some of our residents." Sarah was taken to the common room where several elderly people were sitting in comfortable chairs, some knitting, others reading, some simply looking out the window. "This is Mrs. Carroll," said Teresa, introducing a woman of about 80 with perfectly combed white hair. Mrs. Carroll was a primary school teacher for 45 years. Carroll smiled and her eyes shone with intelligence. "Nice to meet you, dear. Are you the new volunteer?" "Yes," Sarah replied, surprised that this woman seemed so lucid. "I did not expect that." "Well, did not expect that we could hold a conversation." Carol laughed softly. "Many young people think that because we are old, we are stupid. But let me tell you a secret. We have more experience and wisdom in our little fingers than most young people in their whole body." During the next few hours, Sarah was assigned to help with various tasks. She helped Mr. Ernest, an 85-year-old former engineer, walk through the garden. She listened as he told her stories of how he had helped build some of the first subway lines in the city in the 60s. She helped Mrs. Lucy write a letter to her granddaughter who lived in California. She read the newspaper aloud to Mr. Frank, whose eyesight was no longer what it used to be, and slowly something began to change inside her. These were not just unimportant old people. They were people with incredible stories, with rich and complex lives, with wisdom earned through decades of experience. Mrs. Carroll told her about how she had taught more than 2,000 children to read throughout her career. Mr. Ernest showed her old photographs of the subway construction, pointing to himself as a young engineer with a yellow helmet. Mrs. Lucy told her about how she had raised 5 children alone after her husband died in a work accident. When Sarah left the nursing home at 5 in the afternoon, she felt emotionally exhausted, but in a way she had never experienced. It was not the physical exhaustion of a day of shopping on Fifth Avenue, it was the exhaustion of having really connected with other human beings, of having listened to their stories, of having mattered even for a moment in their lives. That night, Richard and Sarah met in their small apartment. Both were exhausted, both had sore feet, both had stories to tell. "How was your day?" asked Richard, sitting heavily on the worn sofa that came with the furnished apartment. "It was unexpected," admitted Sarah. "The old people are incredible, Richard. They have so many stories, so much wisdom. Mrs. Carroll told me something I cannot get out of my head." "What did she say?" "She said she can see my soul, that my soul is hungry not for food or money, but for purpose. She asked me what I had done in my life that really mattered, something I could be proud of on my deathbed." Richard remained silent. "And what did you answer?" "I could not answer anything," whispered Sarah, tears forming in her eyes. "I realized I have done nothing, absolutely nothing. I have lived 32 years on this planet, and I have not done a single thing that really matters." Richard took her hand. "I felt the same today. When Anthony gave me that burger during the break, when he treated me with kindness despite how I have treated him in the past, I realized something. He is a better person than me. He earns a fraction of what I earned, but he is richer in the things that really matter." They sat in silence for a moment, holding hands in that small and modest apartment. Outside, they could hear the sounds of the city, sirens wailing, children playing basketball in the street, a couple arguing in the apartment next door. "Sarah," said Richard finally, "I have to confess something. When my dad proposed this, I thought I would only have to endure 6 months, pretend I had changed, and then I could go back to my previous life. But today I realized something." "What?" "I realized I do not want to go back to being the person I was." That person was empty, full of money and possessions, but completely empty inside. Sarah looked at him, and for the first time in years, she really saw him. She did not see the successful executive with the expensive suit. She saw the man she had chosen to love, the man who was somewhere under all the layers of arrogance and pretense. "I do not want to go back to being who I was either," she admitted. "But I am afraid, Richard. I am afraid that if we change too much, we will not recognize each other." "Then we will change together," replied Richard, squeezing her hand, "and we will know each other again, but this time as real people, not as the people we pretended to be." However, their transformation was far from complete. The biggest test was still to come. And it arrived 2 days later when Richard was serving during lunch and saw someone enter whom he recognized immediately. It was Michael, his former colleague from the multinational company. Michael was accompanied by 3 executives, clearly on an important business lunch. Richard felt panic. Should he hide? Should he ask Oscar to switch him to another section? But before he could decide, Oscar approached. "Richard, table 7 is yours. There are 4 people." Table 7 was exactly where Michael and his colleagues had sat. There was no escape. With trembling legs, Richard approached the table. "Good afternoon, gentlemen. Welcome to the Imperial Crown. My name is Richard, and I will be your waiter this afternoon." Michael looked up from his menu, and his eyes opened with absolute shock. "Richard? Richard Miller?" There was no way to avoid it now. "Yes, Michael. It is me." The other 3 executives looked between Richard and Michael with curiosity. "Richard used to be one of our regional directors," explained Michael, clearly enjoying the moment. "One of the best, in fact. What happened, friend? Did they fire you?" Richard could feel his cheeks burning with shame. All the eyes at the nearby tables were on him. This was the moment. He could invent a lie, say it was something temporary to protect his ego, or he could tell the truth. "I resigned," said Richard, keeping his voice steady. "I decided I needed a change in my life. I needed to learn humility." Michael laughed, but it was not a kind laugh. "Humility? Did you become a waiter to learn humility? That is ridiculous. Richard, you were one of us. You were someone important. And now what? Are you going to bring us water and clean our plates?" "Yes," replied Richard simply. "That is exactly what I am going to do." For a moment something passed between the 2 men. Michael saw something in Richard's eyes he had not seen before. It was not defeat. It was not shame. It was peace. It was the peace of someone who was finally being honest with himself. "Well," said Michael, finally, his tone a little less cruel, "then bring us 4 bottles of mineral water. And take your time. We are in no hurry." While Richard walked away towards the service area, he heard Michael talking to his colleagues. "Poor guy. Must have had some kind of existential crisis. He will probably go back to the corporate world in a few months." But Richard knew the truth. He was not having a crisis. He was having an awakening. And although the path ahead would be difficult for the first time in years, he felt he was walking in the right direction. 3 months had passed since that fateful night at the Imperial Crown. 3 months that felt like 3 years. Richard looked at himself in the mirror of the small apartment bathroom. He had lost weight. His face looked thinner with lines of tiredness around his eyes. But there was something different, too. His eyes had a clarity they had not had in years. "Richard, we are going to be late," called Sarah from the living room. She had also changed physically. She no longer wore elaborate makeup or designer clothes. Her hair, once dyed platinum blonde, now showed her natural dark brown roots. She wore simple jeans and a cotton blouse, and she was more beautiful than ever. While they walked together towards the subway station, Richard took her hand, which was something they had not done in years. "How do you feel?" he asked her. "Tired," admitted Sarah. "Mrs. Carroll was very sick yesterday. I spent 3 extra hours with her, holding her hand while we waited for her daughter to arrive from Boston. Is she better now?" "Yes, thank God. But it made me think, Richard, that woman is 82 years old. She has lived an incredible life. She taught thousands of children to read. She raised 4 children alone after her husband died, and now she is in that nursing home waiting for her own children to visit her. And most of the time they do not come." There were tears in Sarah's eyes. Her daughter came yesterday only because they called her, saying it was an emergency, and when she arrived, the first thing she asked was how long she would have to stay. She did not ask how her mother was. She did not hug her. She just wanted to know when she could leave. Richard stopped in the middle of the sidewalk. "Sarah, I was exactly like that daughter, even worse. At least she came when they called her. I did not even answer my dad's calls." "I know," replied Sarah softly. "And me too. I avoided family gatherings because I thought your family was not refined enough for me. God, we were monsters." On the subway, squeezed between other passengers, Richard observed the people around him. A young father carried his sleeping son in his arms while his wife carried grocery bags. A student reviewed notes for an exam, her eyes tired but determined. An older man with calloused hands read a sports newspaper, probably returning from a night shift. These were the real people of New York, the people who worked hard every day, who fought for their families, who found joy in simple things, the people he had despised for years. "What are you thinking about?" asked Sarah, noticing his distant gaze. "I am thinking that for years I lived in a bubble. I thought success meant getting away from all this." He gestured toward the crowded car. "But now I realize that getting away from this was getting away from humanity, from real life." They arrived at the Imperial Crown just as Oscar was opening the doors. "Good morning, Richard, Sarah." He greeted them with a genuine smile. In these 3 months, Oscar had become something more than a boss. He was a mentor, almost a friend. "Good morning, Oscar," they replied in unison. "Richard, today you will have the main section, the center tables where the most demanding customers are. Do you feel ready?" 3 months ago, Richard would have panicked at that question. Now he nodded with confidence. "I am ready." And he was. He had learned not only the technical skills of being a good waiter, but something much more important. He had learned to serve with dignity, to find pride in a job well done, no matter what that job was. The lunch shift started quietly, but around 2 in the afternoon the restaurant filled up completely. Richard moved between the tables, with Grace taking orders, serving food, anticipating customers' needs before they asked. At one table was a family celebrating their grandmother's birthday. Richard brought them a special dessert with a candle courtesy of the house, and the smile on the old woman's face when everyone sang happy birthday made all the effort worthwhile. At another table, a nervous young man was clearly about to propose to his girlfriend. Richard discreetly coordinated with the pianist to play the couple's favorite song at the exact moment. When the young man knelt down and took out the ring, the whole restaurant erupted in applause. These were the moments Richard had learned to value. Real human moments, genuine connections. As an executive, he had never experienced this. He had been too busy chasing promotions and bonuses to notice the real people around him. However, not everything was beautiful. At 3 in the afternoon, a group of 5 businessmen entered the restaurant. Richard recognized 2 of them. They were partners from his old company. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," he greeted professionally. "Welcome to the Imperial Crown." One of them, a man named Frank, stared at him. "Richard Miller, I cannot believe it. I heard the rumors, but I did not believe them. You are really working as a waiter." The other men at the table began to laugh. "Man, you must have screwed up big time to end up here," said another. "What did you do? Did you steal from the company? Did you mess with the boss's wife?" Richard felt the heat rise up his neck, but took a deep breath. Anthony had taught him how to handle difficult customers. "Gentlemen, would you like to hear the specials of the day?" But Frank was not ready to let him go. No, wait. You have to tell us. How is it that the great Richard Miller, the man who once closed a $5 million deal, is now waiting tables? It is like a soap opera. My personal life is exactly that, replied Richard calmly. Now, do you wish to order, or do you need more time with the menu? Frank leaned back in his chair, studying Richard. Do you know what is the most pathetic thing? That your wife also fell with you. I heard Sarah is working in a nursing home. Sarah, the queen of the Upper East Side, cleaning old people. It is almost poetic. Richard felt his hands clench into fists, but then he remembered something Mr. Robert had told him once when he was a child. Son, true strength lies not in hitting when you are provoked. It lies in maintaining your dignity when others try to take it away. My wife, said Richard slowly and clearly, is doing an incredible job helping people who need it. She is learning from people who have lived extraordinary lives. She is growing as a human being. If you consider that pathetic, then I really do not know what to tell you. Silence fell over the table. Frank seemed surprised by the answer. Wow, you really drank the Kool-Aid, right? Or are you acting because you know you cannot get another job? I am not acting, replied Richard. For the first time in my adult life, I am not acting. I am being real. It is liberating. He walked away before they could answer, his legs shaking slightly. In the service area, Anthony was waiting for him. I heard all that. You handled the situation perfectly. It did not feel perfect. It felt horrible. Of course it felt horrible, said Anthony. But what matters is how you responded. With dignity. With grace. Your father would be proud. My father. Richard looked around nervously. Has he been here? Mr. Robert comes every week, admitted Anthony with a smile. He sits at different tables, always disguised in some way. Sometimes he wears a hat and dark glasses. Other times he dresses like a tourist. But he is always watching. He has seen everything. Everything, confirmed Anthony. He has seen your progress. He has seen your mistakes. He has seen how you have grown. And not just you. He has also been watching Sarah at the nursing home. He has spies everywhere. He laughed. Your father is a very clever man. Richard felt a mix of emotions. Should he feel spied on, or should he feel comforted that his father cared enough to watch over him? That night, when Richard and Sarah returned to their apartment, they found a letter slid under the door. The envelope was made of fine and elegant paper, and the wax seal bore the initials R.M. Robert Miller. With trembling hands, Richard opened the letter. His father's handwriting was unmistakable, elegant but firm. Dear Richard and Sarah, began the letter. 3 months have passed since your journey began. I have been watching not only as a father, but as the owner of the restaurant and acquaintance of the nursing home where you work. I have heard reports from Oscar, from Anthony, from Teresa at the nursing home. But more importantly, I have seen with my own eyes. Richard continued reading aloud so Sarah could hear. I have seen Richard stay 2 extra hours to help clean up after a drunk customer vomited in the dining room. I have seen how you defended a new waitress when a customer treated her badly. I have seen how you have started arriving early to help set up the restaurant without anyone asking you. And Sarah, I have heard wonderful stories about you. Teresa tells me you have become the residents' favorite, that you spend your free time teaching them to use tablets so they can make video calls with their families, that you organized a surprise birthday party for Mr. Ernest when no one else remembered. Tears rolled down Sarah's cheeks as Richard continued. But I have also seen your moments of weakness. I have seen you argue about whether it is worth going on. I heard you, Sarah, when you told Richard you wanted to quit, that it was too hard. And I saw you, Richard, when you almost hit that customer who insulted your father without knowing that your father was sitting at the table next door watching. Richard remembered that incident from 2 weeks ago. A drunk customer had made derogatory comments about failed fathers who cannot support their children. Richard had been about to lose control, but Anthony had stopped him in time. I want you to know, continued the letter, that real change is not linear. It is not perfect. It is 2 steps forward and 1 step back. It is getting up every day and choosing to be better even when everything in you wants to give up. And that is exactly what you have been doing. But now comes the hardest part. The next 3 months will be harder than the first 3, because now that you have tasted this new lifestyle, now that you have started to change, the temptation to go back to the old will come. The comfort of your previous life will call you. Your old friends will pressure you. Society will try to convince you to return to normality. This is my question for you. Will you keep going because you have to, Or will you keep going because you want to? Because if you are only doing it for the money, for the inheritance, then you have already failed. But if you are doing it because you really want to be better people, then you have already won, regardless of what happens to my fortune. The letter ended with, I love you both. I have always loved you. But now, for the first time in years, I also respect you. With love, Dad. Richard dropped the letter and covered his face with his hands. He sobbed, his body shaking with the force of his emotions. Sarah hugged him, and she was crying too. I am not doing it for the money, said Richard between sobs. Not anymore. I am doing it because I finally understand what my dad has been trying to teach me all my life. Me neither, added Sarah. Mrs. Carroll asked me last week what I would do if Mr. Robert decided to disinherit us completely. I told her the truth. I would stay at the nursing home anyway. I would stay because I finally found something that makes me feel useful, that gives meaning to my life. They sat on the floor of that small apartment, hugging, crying, but also healing. Healing from years of living fake lives, of chasing empty things, of measuring their worth by their bank account instead of their character. The next day, something extraordinary happened. Richard was serving lunch when a small boy, maybe 5 years old, spilled his orange juice all over the table and floor. The boy's mother looked mortified. I am so sorry. My son is very clumsy. Please do not charge us for this. Richard knelt down to the boy's level, who was about to cry. Hey, champion, do not worry. Do you know what? When I was your age, I spilled a whole pitcher of water on my mom's table, and she told me something I never forgot. What did she tell you? Asked the boy with a trembling voice. She told me accidents happen. The important thing is not the accident, but how we react afterwards. So let's clean this up together, and then we are going to keep enjoying our day. How about we clean this together? The boy's face lit up. Really? Really? Richard and the boy cleaned together, turning the task into a game. When they finished, the boy was laughing. The mother had tears in her eyes. Thank you. You do not know how much this means. Most people would have made us feel terrible. We are all human, replied Richard. We all make mistakes. The important thing is how we treat each other afterwards. While the boy and his mother were leaving, Richard felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned and saw an older man with a hat and dark glasses, but he would recognize that posture anywhere. Dad, he whispered. Mr. Robert took off his glasses and smiled. There were tears in his eyes. That was your moment, son. That was the moment I knew the transformation is real. It was not how you handled difficult customers. It was not how you worked hard. It was how you treated that little boy with kindness and dignity. That is how I treated you when you were a child, which I now see you finally understand why. Richard threw himself into his father's arms, and both cried right there in the middle of the restaurant. The customers watched, some with curiosity, others with understanding. Anthony approached silently and changed the sign on the table where Mr. Robert was to reserved, giving them privacy. I am so proud of you, son, whispered Mr. Robert. Your mother would be so proud. Dad, I have no words. I am so sorry for everything I said, everything I did. Shh! You do not need to apologize anymore. You have already proven it with your actions, and actions always speak louder than words. They sat together, father and son, in that restaurant that represented so much of their family legacy, and for the first time in years they simply talked. Not about business or money or social status. They talked about life, about love, about what really matters. And Richard realized that these 3 months, although brutally difficult, had been the greatest gift his father could have given him, the opportunity to find himself again. But the journey was not over yet. There were still 3 months left, and as Mr. Robert had warned in his letter, the next 3 months would be the true test. Because it is one thing to change when you have no choice. It is quite another to maintain that change when the doors open again. The question was, who would Richard be when he finally had the option to return to his previous life? That answer would determine not only his inheritance, but the rest of his life. The 5th month arrived with challenges none of them had anticipated. It was as if the universe was testing their commitment in the most cruel way possible. It all started when Sarah received a call from her old friend Valerie. Sarah, darling, where have you been? We have missed you at all our gatherings. We are having a brunch this Sunday at the country club. You have to come. Sarah looked at her reflection in the mirror of the small apartment, her hair now completely brown without expensive dyes, her skin without the weekly spa treatments she used to have, simple clothes bought at discount stores. Valerie, my life has changed a lot. I do not think I fit in those gatherings now. What are you talking about? I heard crazy rumors that Richard left his job and that you are living well, like normal people. But that cannot be true, right? Tell me they are just gossip. Sarah took a deep breath. It is not gossip, it is true. Richard works as a waiter and I work in a nursing home. The silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. Then Valerie laughed uncomfortably. Ah, I understand. It is like a social responsibility project or something, right? For Richard's company? How noble. But tell me when it ends so we can make real plans. It is not a project, Valerie. It is our life now. And do you know what? I am happier now than I was in all those years of superficial brunches and empty gossip. Wow. Valerie's voice turned cold. You do not have to be rude. If you prefer to live like a poor person, that is your decision. But do not act as if you were better than us. After hanging up, Sarah sat on the worn sofa and cried. Not because she missed that life, but because she realized how superficial all those friendships had been. When Richard came home that night, he found her still crying. What happened, love? She told him about the call with Valerie. Richard hugged her tight. I also received similar calls. Frank called me to offer help. He told me that if I needed money, he could get me a loan, as if I were some kind of charity case. And what did you tell him? I told him I did not need his help, that for the first time in my life I was exactly where I needed to be. But the temptations did not end there. A week later, Richard's former boss, the CEO of the multinational company, visited the Imperial Crown. Richard was cleaning a table when he heard a familiar voice. Richard Miller? What an interesting surprise. It was Mr. Charles, the most powerful man in the company, a tycoon who handled billion-dollar contracts. Mr. Charles. Richard straightened up, feeling the old instinct to act submissive before his former boss. But then he realized he no longer worked for this man. I need to talk to you. Richard looked at Oscar, who nodded, giving him permission. He sat down, feeling strangely at peace. I have been following your situation, began Mr. Charles. It is fascinating, really. A brilliant executive. One of my best talents now waiting tables. Some say you had a nervous breakdown. Others say it is some kind of social experiment. It is none of those things, replied Richard calmly. It is a personal journey. I am learning humility, gratitude, and what it really means to work hard. Mr. Charles leaned back in his chair, studying Richard. Interesting, very noble, but also very foolish. Richard, you left a promising career. You were on your way to becoming national director. You would have earned more than $30,000 a month. And you threw it all away for... What? A lesson in humility? Yes, replied Richard simply. Exactly for that. Well, here is the deal. Mr. Charles leaned forward. I want you back. The company wants you back. We are willing to offer you a position even better than the one you had, Senior Regional Director. $35,000 a month. Company car, unlimited expense account, your own office on the executive floor. Richard's heart beat faster. $35,000 a month. It was more than 40 times what he earned now as a waiter. He could give Sarah the comfortable life again. They could go back to the Upper East Side, to the elegant restaurants, to the vacations in Europe. There is a condition, continued Mr. Charles. You have to start Monday, in 5 days. I know you are doing this 6-month experiment, but business does not wait. This offer expires in 5 days. Why the rush? Asked Richard, his mind working quickly. Because we have a massive contract with a European company that needs someone with your experience. If you do not accept, I will have to give the position to Frank, and frankly, you are better than him. That night, Richard came home in a state of complete agitation. He told Sarah about the offer. $35,000 a month, Sarah. We could get out of this place. We could have our life back. Sarah looked at him with serious eyes. Do you want our life back? I do not know. I mean, do you not miss living comfortably? Do you not miss not having to worry about money? Do you know what I miss? Replied Sarah. I do not miss anything about that life. I miss the person I used to be when we were young and newly married. When we lived in an apartment even smaller than this, and we were happy. I miss the man who loved me for who I was, not for how I looked on his arm at social events. Sarah, that is not fair. It is not fair. Richard, we have to finish these 6 months, not for your father's money, but because we need to prove to ourselves that the change is real. If you accept that job now, all this will have been for nothing. But it is $35,000 a month. Richard sounded desperate. Think of what we could do with that money." "Yes, we could do a lot," said Sarah sadly. "We could buy many things, but would we be happy? Would we be better people? Or would we simply go back to being who we were, empty, arrogant, and miserable, despite all our wealth?" Richard stayed awake all night, staring at the ceiling, thinking. Mr. Charles's offer was tempting, incredibly tempting. But then he thought of Anthony, who worked long hours for a fraction of that salary, and was happier than Richard had ever been as an executive. He thought of Mrs. Carroll, who lived with almost nothing but had a wealth of experiences and wisdom. He thought of his father, Mr. Robert, who had built an empire but chose to live modestly so as not to lose touch with his humanity. And he thought of the boy who had spilled the orange juice and how that simple act of kindness had made him feel more satisfied than any $1,000,000 deal. The next day, Richard went to find Mr. Charles at his office. The secretary was surprised to see him. "Richard Miller is here to see Mr. Charles," she announced over the intercom. Mr. Charles received him with a big smile. "Did you make your decision? I knew you would see reason. Let me call Human Resources to start the paperwork." "Mr. Charles," interrupted Richard, "I came to thank you for your offer, but I have to decline." Mr. Charles's smile faded. "What? Are you turning down $35,000 a month to remain a waiter?" "Yes," said Richard firmly, "because what I am learning now is worth more than any amount of money." "You are crazy," said Mr. Charles, shaking his head. "Completely crazy. Do you know how many people would kill for this opportunity? I know 6 months ago I would have been one of those people, but I am not that person anymore, and that is something money cannot buy." As Richard walked out of the corporate building, he felt something extraordinary. Relief. Pure and simple relief. He had faced the greatest possible temptation and had chosen the right path, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. That night when he told Sarah what he had done, she cried with joy. "I am so proud of you, so incredibly proud." "I could not have done it without you," admitted Richard. "You reminded me who I want to be." But the universe had one last test in store for them. A week later, Sarah received a call from the nursing home. It was Teresa, and her voice sounded urgent. "Sarah, you need to come now. It is Mrs. Carroll. She is dying." Sarah ran to the nursing home, her heart beating hard. When she arrived at Mrs. Carroll's room, she found the old woman in her bed, surrounded by medical machines. Her breathing was weak and labored. Mrs. Carroll's daughter was there, but she was talking on the phone about work, barely paying attention to her dying mother. "Mrs. Carroll," whispered Sarah, taking the old woman's hand. Mrs. Carroll's eyes opened slowly, and a small smile appeared on her lips. "Sarah, my child, you came." "Of course I came. I am always going to come when you need me." Mrs. Carroll pointed weakly towards her daughter, who was still on the phone. "Her? She does not understand. She spent her whole life chasing money. She forgot what matters." "Shh, do not strain yourself," said Sarah, tears falling down her cheeks. "But you understood," continued Mrs. Carroll with difficulty. "You arrived here thinking you were superior. But you learned. You learned that we are all equal. We all need love. We all need purpose." "You taught me that," said Sarah. "You and everyone else here taught me what really matters in life." Mrs. Carroll squeezed Sarah's hand weakly. "Sarah, promise me something. Promise me you will never forget these lessons. That you will never go back to being the person you were." "I promise," sobbed Sarah. "I promise with all my heart." "Good." Mrs. Carroll closed her eyes, her smile still on her face. "Then I am ready. I can go in peace knowing I helped save a soul." Mrs. Carroll passed away peacefully that afternoon with Sarah holding her hand. Her daughter hung up the phone only when the machines began to make that continuous flat sound indicating the heart has stopped. "Why did you not tell me it was so urgent?" she shouted at Teresa. "I called you 3 hours ago," replied Teresa calmly. "You chose to stay in your work meeting." Mrs. Carroll's daughter looked at Sarah, who was still holding her mother's hand, tears running down her face. And at that moment something changed in the daughter's expression. She saw what she had lost. She saw what she had sacrificed in her pursuit of success. And it was too late. That night Sarah told Richard about Mrs. Carroll. "She made me promise I would never forget the lessons I learned here. And I will not, Richard, never. No matter what happens with your father's inheritance. No matter if we end up rich or poor. I will never go back to being who I was." "Me neither," promised Richard. "And you know what? I do not even care about the inheritance anymore. What we have gained in these months is worth infinitely more than any amount of money. It was only 2 weeks until the 6 months were up, 2 weeks for Mr. Roberts' final evaluation. But for Richard and Sarah, the evaluation no longer mattered. They had already gained something much more valuable than money. They had regained their souls. They had recovered their humanity. They had found themselves. And in a corner of the nursing home, observing everything discreetly, was Mr. Robert. He had heard about Mrs. Carroll's death. He had heard how Sarah had been there until the end, while the old woman's own daughter had barely paid attention. He had heard about how Richard had rejected the offer of $35,000 a month. His son and daughter-in-law had passed all the tests, not because they had to, but because they had genuinely changed. But Mr. Robert had one last test prepared, one that none of them would see coming. A test that would determine not only if they had changed, but if that change was permanent. And that test would arrive in exactly 1 week, just before the full 6 months were up. It was a test that would put everything at stake one last time. And Richard and Sarah's answer would determine not only their financial future, but the entire legacy of the Miller family. Exactly 3 days before the 6 months were up, Richard received a sealed envelope in his locker at the restaurant. The wax seal with the initials RM made him know immediately who sent it. Richard and Sarah, the letter read. I invite you to dinner on Friday night at 8 p.m. at the Imperial Crown. It will be our last meeting before the final evaluation. Come dressed as you are. You do not need to impress me with fancy clothes. I just need to see you as you are now. With love, Dad. Friday arrived faster than they expected. Richard put on his cleanest jeans and a simple shirt. Sarah wore a simple dress she had bought at a local market for $20. As they walked towards the restaurant, their hands intertwined, both felt butterflies in their stomachs. Are you nervous? Asked Sarah. Terrified, admitted Richard, but not about the money. I am terrified of disappointing my dad again. You will not disappoint him, Sarah assured him. You are no longer the person who disappointed him 6 months ago. When they arrived at the Imperial Crown, Anthony greeted them at the door with a huge smile. Mr. Robert is waiting for you in the private room. And let me tell you something, I have never seen him so excited. He guided them through the main restaurant, where several of the waiters and cooks stopped to greet Richard. In these 6 months he had become one of them. Not just a co-worker, but a friend. The private room was elegant but cozy. Mr. Robert was sitting at the head of a beautifully decorated table. When he saw Richard and Sarah enter, he stood up, and tears were already shining in his eyes. My children, he said with a broken voice. Look at you, so different and so the same at the same time. Richard ran to his father and hugged him tight. Dad, we have finished the 6 months. Well, almost. 3 days are missing, but we have done everything you asked. I know I have been watching every step of the way. Mr. Robert pulled away and looked at both of them. Sit down, please. We have a lot to talk about. Once seated, Mr. Robert began. These 6 months were designed to be the hardest test of your lives. And they were right. Richard and Sarah nodded. But they were also the most transformative, added Sarah. They changed us in ways we never imagined possible. Exactly, smiled Mr. Robert. And now I must tell you something that will change your perspective on everything that has happened. He leaned forward, his eyes shining with a mixture of pride and amusement. Every challenge you faced, every temptation, every test, I orchestrated them all. Richard blinked in confusion. What do you mean? Valerie's call to Sarah. I asked her to call. I told her exactly what to say to test if Sarah had really left behind her superficial life. Sarah gasped. Did Valerie work for you? Not exactly worked for me, but I asked her for a favor. And curiously, she felt terrible after the call. She called me crying, saying she had been so cruel to you that she realized how empty her own life was. In fact, she is now a volunteer at the same nursing home where you work. And Mr. Charles? Asked Richard slowly, beginning to understand the magnitude of his father's manipulation. Mr. Charles is my friend of 30 years, admitted Mr. Robert. I asked him to offer you that impossible-to-refuse job. I needed to know if you would choose money or your principles. And you chose your principles. I am so proud I have no words. Richard did not know whether to feel angry or impressed. Dad, that was massive manipulation. Yes, it was, accepted Mr. Robert without regret. But it was necessary. You see, son, anyone can behave well when there is no alternative. The true measure of a man is how he behaves when he has choices. And you chose correctly every time. He stood up and walked towards a wall of the private room where there was a large painting covered with a cloth. Now let me show you something. He removed the cloth, revealing a beautiful painting. It was an oil painting of Richard, Sarah, and Mr. Robert, but there was something special about it. In the painting was also the image of a beautiful dark-haired woman smiling from the background. "Your mother," whispered Richard. "Yes." Mr. Robert gently touched his wife's image. "This painting was commissioned 6 months ago, the day after that terrible dinner. I told the artist to paint how I hoped our family would look after the transformation. And look at you, it came true." He turned to them, tears running down his cheeks. "Your mother would be so proud when she was dying. Her biggest fear was not leaving me. It was leaving you, Richard, knowing you had become someone she did not recognize. Someone arrogant, cruel, who had forgotten where he came from." "Dad, I am so sorry," sobbed Richard. "I know, son. And now let me fulfill the promise I made to your mother on her deathbed. I promised her I would find a way to save you, to bring back the son we raised with so much love. And I did." Mr. Robert took a large envelope out of his jacket. "This is the new will, the definitive one, and I want to read it in front of you now." He opened the envelope and began to read. "I, Robert Miller, in full possession of my mental faculties, declare that I leave my restaurant empire, valued at $50 million, as well as all my properties and savings, to my son Richard Miller and his wife Sarah." Richard and Sarah looked at each other, stunned. "But Dad, I thought you were going to donate everything to charity." "Let me finish," smiled Mr. Robert. "However, this inheritance comes with permanent conditions. First condition: Richard will work in the restaurants, but not as a distant executive. He will start as manager of the Imperial Crown, working side by side with the employees, knowing every aspect of the business from the inside. Second condition: 20% of all profits will go to a foundation in your mother's name, which will help low-income families start their own businesses just as we did. Third condition: every employee of the restaurants will receive annual bonuses based on total profits. No one working for the Miller family will live in poverty. Fourth condition: Sarah will continue her work at the St. Mary Nursing Home, but now as the paid director of a new program we will create, Bridges Between Generations, which will connect young volunteers with the elderly. The program will be funded by the restaurants. And the fifth and most important condition." Mr. Robert paused, his voice trembling. "Every year on the anniversary of that terrible dinner, Richard and Sarah will spend a full week living as they did these 6 months, living in that apartment in Queens, working as a waiter and volunteer, to never forget these lessons." Silence filled the room. Then Richard spoke, his voice firm and clear. "Dad, I accept all the conditions, but I want to add one more." "Which one?" "I want you to live with us. Not in that small apartment in Queens, but in a house. We will buy together a house big enough for a family, but modest enough to keep our feet on the ground. I want my future child to know his grandfather. I want to make up for all the years I wasted distancing myself from you." Mr. Robert could no longer contain his emotions. He cried openly, and Richard and Sarah joined him. They hugged, the three of them, a family finally healed, finally complete. "There is something else you should know," said Mr. Robert when they calmed down. "Anthony." As if he had been waiting for him, Anthony entered the room. But there was something different about him. He was wearing an elegant suit, not his waiter's uniform. "Richard, Sarah, meet Anthony Ramirez, my business partner. He owns 10% of all the restaurants. He is one of the richest men in New York." Richard almost fell off his chair. "What? Anthony is a millionaire." Anthony smiled. "I did not start like that, mister. Robert gave me my first opportunity 20 years ago when I was nobody, and during these 6 months my job was to be your guide, your living example of what it means to work with dignity and humility regardless of how much money you have in the bank. All this time," murmured Sarah, "all this time we have been surrounded by tests and lessons," completed Anthony. "And you passed them all. Mr. Robert not only taught you humility, he taught you to see people for who they are, not for how they look or how much they have." Mr. Robert stood up. "Now there is one last thing, follow me." He led them back to the main dining room of the restaurant, where they were surprised to see it was full of people. But they were not ordinary customers. There were all the employees of the Imperial Crown. There were Teresa and the residents of the St. Mary Nursing Home who could travel, including Mrs. Carroll's daughter who had red eyes from crying. There was Oscar, the manager. There were the cooks, the dishwashers, the cleaning staff. "These are the people who really matter," announced Mr. Robert. "The working people who make our world work. And today I want you all to witness something special." He turned to Richard. "Son, I apologize for the harsh way I taught you this lesson, but I do not regret the result. You have returned to being the son your mother and I raised, the son of whom we can be proud." "No, Dad," replied Richard, his voice amplified by the respectful silence in the room. "It is you who saved me. You saved me from an empty life, from becoming a monster. You gave me the chance to change when many parents would have simply given up on their children." He turned to everyone present. "I want you all to know something. 6 months ago, I was the worst version of myself. I was arrogant, cruel, and despised anyone who was not on my social level. I humiliated my own father in this very restaurant. But these 6 months taught me something invaluable. We are all equal. The waiter, the CEO, the old man in the nursing home, the young student. We all have the same human dignity. We all deserve respect. And true success is not measured in dollars, but in the lives we touch and the people we help." The room erupted in applause. Anthony hugged Richard. Oscar patted him on the back. Teresa hugged Sarah. And in the middle of it all, Mr. Robert watched with deep satisfaction. His plan had worked. His son had returned. Mrs. Carroll's daughter approached Sarah, tears on her face. "My mother died happy thanks to you. Her last words were about how you had changed, how you had given her hope that people can transform. And she was right. I am also changing. I resigned from my corporate job. I am going to spend more time with my own family before it is too late." "Mrs. Carroll was a teacher for all of us," replied Sarah, hugging her. "Her legacy will live on through everyone she touched." Not a celebration of wealth or status, but a celebration of humanity, of transformation, of second chances. They ate together, rich and poor, young and old, all as equals. And while Richard watched his father laughing with Anthony, while he saw Sarah talking animatedly with the nursing home residents, he realized something profound. True wealth was never in his father's bank account. It was always in relationships, in human connections, in love and mutual respect. 6 months after that celebration, Richard and Sarah were in the park with his father. Mr. Robert was pushing a stroller where his newborn granddaughter Helen slept, named after her grandmother. "Do you know what I think?" said Richard, watching his daughter sleep. "What?" "I think when Helen grows up, we will tell her this story. We will tell her how her father was a terrible man who learned to be better. We will teach her that it is never too late to change. And we will teach her," added Sarah, "that money is a tool, not a goal. That real success is measured in how we treat others." Mr. Robert smiled, his eyes moist. "Your mother would be so happy. She always said family was the most important thing. Now we finally have a real family again." As they walked together through the park, a united and healed family, Richard reflected on the incredible journey he had taken. From arrogant executive to humble waiter, from ashamed son to proud heir, from empty man to loving father. And all because his father loved him enough to give him the hardest lesson of his life. The lesson that a person's true worth is not in what they have, but in what they give. Not in how they are treated, but in how they treat others. And above all, that family, respect, and humility are treasures that no amount of money can buy. The story of Richard and Mr. Robert became a legend in New York City. The Imperial Crown is now known not only for its excellent food, but for its fair labor practices and its commitment to the community. Sarah's Bridges Between Generations program expanded nationally, connecting thousands of young people with the elderly, creating understanding between generations. And every year, faithfully, Richard and Sarah spend a week living in that small apartment in Queens, working as a waiter and volunteer. Not because they have to, but because they want to. It is their annual reminder that they are never too far from forgetting what really matters. Little Helen, now 6 years old, often asks her dad why they do this every year. And Richard always answers her, "To remember my love, to remember that we are all equal, that we all deserve dignity, and that money should never change who we are in our heart." Mr. Robert, now 72 years old, continues to visit his restaurants daily, greeting every employee by name, asking about their families, sharing his wisdom. And when asked what his greatest achievement in life is, he never mentions the $50 million restaurant empire. He always says, "My greatest achievement was saving my son. The rest is just money." Did you like this story of transformation and second chances? If these life stories inspire you and make you reflect, it would be wonderful if you subscribe to the channel not to miss more tales like this. Each story we share has the power to change perspectives and remind us of what truly matters in life. Let me know in the comments. Have you ever had to learn a difficult lesson that changed your life? What do you think about Mr. Roberts' method? Was it too harsh or necessary? I would love to read your reflections. And if this story touched your heart, consider sharing it with someone who needs to remember that it is never too late to change, that humility is a virtue, and that the true value of a person is not measured in their bank account. Remember, true wealth is not in what you have, but in who you are and how you treat others. See you in the next story. See you soon.